Hi. If you're watching this tonight, I hope you're sitting somewhere in comfortable clothes, relaxed. And if you're watching in the morning, I hope you have a nice cup of coffee or tea or even a glass of juice to sip on. Today I thought I'd share with you an article written by Moses Y. Lee, pastor and church planner in the Presbyterian system. The article was recently published on www.thegospelcoalition.org. And I think there's something for us to consider in this article. Maybe you'll agree. Illness and epidemics are not strangers to the world or to Christians, but the response to those epidemics was different by non-Christians and Christians of the early church. Non-Christian response to epidemics, let's take a look at those first. In 249 to 262 AD, Western civilization was devastated by one of the deadliest pandemics in its history. Though the exact cause of the plague is uncertain, the city of Rome was said to have lost an estimated 5,000 people each day at the height of the outbreak. One witness, Bishop Dionysius of Alexandria, wrote that although the plague did not discriminate between Christians and non-Christians, its fullest impact fell on non-Christians. Having noted the difference between Christians and non-Christian responses to the plague, he says, of the non-Christians in Alexandria, at the first onset of the disease, they pushed the sufferers away and fled from their dearest, throwing them into the roads before they were dead and treating unburied corpses as dirt, hoping thereby to avoid and avert the spread and contagion of the fatal disease. But do as they might, they found that it was difficult to escape. Non-Christian accounts confirm this sentiment. A century later, the Emperor Julian attempted to curb the growth of Christianity after the plague by leading a campaign to establish pagan charities that mirrored the work of Christians in the realm. In 362 AD, in a letter, Julian complained that the Hellenists needed to match the Christians in virtue, blaming the recent growth of Christianity on, quote, their benevolence to strangers, their care for the graves of the dead, and the pretended holiness of their lives, end quote. Elsewhere he wrote, quote, for it is a disgrace that the impious Galileans, that would be the Christians, support not only their own poor, but ours as well, end quote. Though Julian questioned the motives of Christians, his embarrassment over Hellenistic charities confirms pagan efforts fell massively short of Christian standards of serving the sick and the poor, especially during epidemics. According to Rodney Stark in The Rise of Christianity, this is because, quote, for all that Julian urged the pagan priests to match these Christian practices, there was little or no response, because there were no doctrinal basis or traditional practices for them to build upon, end quote. Now let's take a look at what the Christian response to the epidemics was. Lee writes, if the non-Christian response to the plague was characterized by self-protection, self-preservation, and avoiding the sick at all costs, the Christian response was the opposite. According to Dionysius, the plague served as a schooling and testing for Christians. In a detailed description of how Christians responded to the plague in Alexandria, he writes of how, quote, the best, end quote, among them honorably served the sick until they themselves caught the disease and died. Most of our brother Christians showed unbounded love and loyalty, never sparing themselves and thinking only of one another. Heedless of the danger, they took charge of the sick, attended their every need, and ministered to them in Christ. and with them departed this life serenely happy, for they were infected by others with the disease, drawing on themselves the sickness of their neighbors, and cheerfully accepting their pains. Similarly, in Pontius's biography of Cyprian, the bishop of Carthage, he writes of how the bishop reminded believers to serve not only fellow Christians, but also non-Christians during the plague. Quote, "There is nothing remarkable in cherishing merely our own people with the due attention of love, but that one might become perfect who should do something more than heathen men or publicans, one who, overcoming evil with good and practicing a merciful kindness like that of God, should love his enemies as well. Thus the good was done to all men, not merely to the households of faith." End quote. The impact of this service was twofold. First, Christians' sacrifice for their fellow believers stunned the unbelieving world as they witnessed communal love like they'd never seen before. And two, Christian sacrifice for non-Christians resulted in the early church experiencing exponential growth as non-Christian survivors who benefited from the care of their Christian neighbors converted to the faith in mass. Quote, "Other people would not think this a time for festival," Dionysius said of the epidemic of his day, "but far from being a time of distress, it is a time of unimaginable joy." End quote. For people, to be clear, Dionysius was not celebrating the death and suffering that accompany epidemics. Rather, he was rejoicing in the opportunity such circumstances present for testing our faith, to go out of our way to love and serve our neighbors, spreading gospel hope in both word and deed in times of great fear. Well, that's what Pastor Lee writes. Something perhaps to ponder as we move forward each day with our own pandemic. Peace be with you.